we have already went ahead and created the functionality for us to share a file from iOS. So we have created this getVisibleViewController. Our show method is already performing the functionality that it needs. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on Android, where we of course already have that show method and from where we're going to be calling the native functionality. Now, before we go ahead and do that, I'm actually going to need to go ahead and open the Android manifest and add a few required permissions. So Android is going to require a few permissions to be established in here. So let's go ahead and first search for some external storage permissions. There's the read external storage and the write external storage permissions that we have to establish here. So now with these two permissions, let's go ahead and implement the functionality inside of the show method. So of course here the functionality is going to be very platform dependent. It's going to be entirely native functionality and it's not going to resemble anything to what we just did on iOS, although of course eventually the result should be quite similar. So in the case of Android, the first thing that I'm going to need to do is create an intent. So if you have ever developed Android applications, you know that pretty much everything with the communication between activities and things of the sorts are performed through intents. So what I will do is create a new intent. I will need a using directive here that is going to be of type intent.actionSend. So this is going to tell the intent that what we are trying to do is send. We're not trying to navigate to a different activity. We're not trying to go ahead and open a web page or open the maps. What we're trying to do is send some value in here. And what I'm going to do is set the intents type through the setType method. And here we're simply going to have to pass a string. And this will very much depend on what type of file we're going to be sending. Now, because I am going to be sending a TXT file, I can simply write in here text/plain. But if these were, for example, a PDF, you would write application/PDF. If this were an image, this could be image/JPEG or PNG. And, in this case, we're going to need to set this to text plain. Then we're going to need to get the document's URI. And this is actually going to require us to get a few things. That will actually, by the way, require me to do something additional that I was forgetting in the manifest. So, because I am going to be setting the file to be in a specific folder, I will want the resources to have a brand new folder that is going to be my XML folder. And inside of my XML, this could actually also go inside of the values folder, for example. Well, let's just go ahead and create a new file instead of this XML that is going to be an XML file. So we have the XML option in here. This is going to be my, let's call it file provider paths. And all I'm going to define is an array of paths with one file's path variable or entry that is going to be called reports, and that is going to have the path which is simply reports/. This eventually is going to be the folder where I'm going to be saving my TXT files. And so having this, I will have to open my Android manifest again, actually navigate to the source, and inside of this application tag, I will have to define a file provider that is pointing to that path. So I can actually go ahead and do something like this, define a provider with a specific name. The authorities in here is going to be important in something that I'm going to use in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this value, which by the way is simply, if we right click on the Android project, go to options and go to Android application, you're going to find the package name. So it's simply the package name and .provider. And we have some false to Android exported, true to grad URI permissions. Again, this is going to be important in just a second. And here is where we're going to be pointing to that file that I have just created. So my file provider path is going to be this source, this XML resource that I have just added to my resources folder. And so where I was is creating a document URI. And when creating the document URI, I will need to access the file provider, which requires a using directive, and it's get URI for file. Now here is where the authority is going to be important. Now first we need to pass a context. And we're going to be doing it through forms.context and have the application context. So this is actually functionality that comes from Xamarin Forms, not from Android, but this allows us to get the context quite easily because after all, the activities are not created here on Android, or they're actually handled, or the context is handled by Xamarin. So that is why we're using that in here. Then the authority is going to be that value that I just copied with the package name .provider. And finally, I am going to be creating a new file. This is a local file. Notice that the namespace is java.io, which to be created is going to require my file path, the one that I'm receiving here on the method. So we already have the document URI. Now to the actual sending of this document. So to the intent, we'll have to put some extra values. And the first thing that I will have to pass is the stream for this document URI. So the document itself. I will also want to send the title and the message. So the intent is going to have, through the put extra, let's pass some extra text in the form of our title and extra subject in the form of our message. And now with this intent, we can actually create the view, or it's called the chooser, where the user is actually going to choose where is the sharing going to happen. So I will create a chooser intent that is going to be equal to intent.create chooser, and it's actually going to be created with the intent that we already have. And let's set the title to the title that we are already receiving. To this chooser intent, we can set some values. For example, set it to grant read URI permissions, which is something that we just saw over there in the Android manifest. We're also setting to grant URI permissions as true. If we didn't do that, this wouldn't be possible, and we absolutely need to do this because there's where our document is going to reside. And finally, all we have to do is start the activity. Now in this case, I also need a context, but what I will do is get it through Android app.application.context, and from the context I can start the activity. And the activity that I want to start is the chooser intent. And actually something different in here. On Android, we are actually not awaiting anything as we are doing over on iOS, where we are awaiting the present view controller async. So this should actually not be an async method, which means that we actually have to return something, but all I'm going to do is do a call to the from result method from the task and just return true. So there you have it. This is what we have to do to make the sharing through Android as well. Now in the next lecture, we're actually going to go back to our shared code and actually implement the functionality to generate this TXT file with the expense report and share it through the show method call that actually we already have in the categories VM, which will mean that we need a new toolbar item, a new command, and of course pass the corresponding values instead of just empty strings here to take a look at the functionality and take a look at how this works on both platforms.